Cloe by Carlos Perez. Clara Johnson cursed at the floor while she swept it. Damn hair, I hate that dog. Glancing at the sleeping dog, she wished she could run a cleaver right through its heart. She swept at some more stray dog hair, which almost seemed to avoid her broom. Each time she swept at it, it darted away like a mouse about to be crushed. Clara sneezed as tiny stray hairs entered her sinuses. Stopping sweeping, she grabbed her handkerchief and blew out stray black and gray hairs from within her nose. My God, she thought, that bitch has even infected my whole body. Clara's husband, Joe, walked into the house and glanced at Clara with her red eyes and runny nose. "I want that dog of yours out of here," she said. Joe stared at Cloe as she lay asleep in the corner of the room next to the fireplace. "Come on, Cloe, old girl," he said, as Cloe slowly opened her eyes and stared at him, a glaucoma-like veil covering her eyes. Her black fur was patched with some areas of gray, especially around her muzzle. Slowly she rose and made her way, her black claws making a clicking sound as she crossed the floor towards Joe, who patted her lightly on the head, once in reach. Clara swung her broom at her as she crossed nearby, barely missing her. "Don't do that, Clara," said Joe. "I want you to get rid of that dog. Just look at all this hair I've swept up, and that's just from this morning alone." Clara pointed at a ball of gray and black hair that was the size of a loaf of bread. "This is everywhere," she said. "When I married you, I didn't know I'd be a housekeeper for your dead wife's dog. Chloe's been with me for over 12 years. She wasn't just Ethel's dog, she's mine too. She's a good old dog, and you'd know that if you treated her nice. I've never done anything to that dog except clean up after her. She's even taken to crapping on the floor. And I've cleaned it up when she has. You've made sure of that. I want her gone. You understand?" Clara looked down at her feet and noticed that the dog hair had collected around her shoes, virtually covering all of her feet. "Jesus, will you look at that?" Clara swept at the hair, which seemed to cling to her like a group of spiders on a nest of flies. "I've had it." With that, Clara threw down the broom and stormed out of the living room. "Come on, old girl," Joe said. "I don't think either of us is wanted in here right now." Joe opened the door for Cloe, and the two of them stepped outside. Once outside, Joe immediately headed for the garage and started working on his 1957 DeSoto, which had just about as many years on it as Cloe. Joe opened the hood and screwed off the top of the radiator, glancing quickly over to Cloe, who was lying quietly in the sun just outside the garage door. "Gonna get pretty cold soon," said Joe to Cloe. "Need to get her ready for winter." Joe pulled out a bottle of antifreeze and started filling the radiator. "Got her flushed out. Now I need to give her the new stuff," he said, as he dropped one empty bottle to the ground and picked up a second one to complete the fill. While filling the radiator, Joe didn't notice Cloe as she slowly crept ever closer to the spent empty bottle of antifreeze lying next to the DeSoto. Joe spied her just in time and kicked the bottle away from Cloe just before her tongue made contact with the green liquid. "Whoa, girl, you can't have that. That'll kill you." Joe picked up the bottle and tossed it into the large trash bin near the garage, making sure the lid was shut down tight after. Joe muttered to himself, "Sure don't know why they make that stuff so animals like it. It's like they want to kill the family pet." Joe pet Cloe on the head to reassure her she did nothing wrong. "It's okay, old girl. You're fine. I'm not mad or anything. Except maybe at those places for making poison tastes good to dogs." Cloe rubbed up against Joe's leg and swung what there was of her nub of a tail back and forth to show there were no hard feelings. Joe was pretty sure at that moment that had Cloe been a cat, she'd be purring pretty loud right then. Clara gently closed the kitchen curtain from where she had a pretty good view of what had just transpired between Cloe and Joe. She was also pretty sure Joe never saw her watching. In fact, she was banking on it. Joe put the last half bottle of antifreeze on a shelf in the garage and signaled Cloe, and the two of them walked down a trail behind the house for their daily walk. They only walked about a mile, but it was more than enough for both of them. After a few minutes, Clara slipped into the garage and took down the bottle of antifreeze and read the red-lettered warning on the back of the bottle. "Keep away from children and pets." Well, Clara had no children to worry about, but Joe did. He had Cloe. That dog was more of his little girl than a real daughter would ever be. It was time, thought Clara, for Joe to find something or someone else to love, mainly her. Clara poured out some of the antifreeze into one of the jelly jar glasses that Joe's now dead wife, Judith, was always so fond of, and that Joe wouldn't throw away no matter how many times Clara had begged him to do so. How fitting, she thought, to kill Judith's favorite dog from one of Judith's favorite glasses. Clara stepped inside the house and picked up Chloe's dog dish and mixed in Chloe's usual dog food with the antifreeze, making sure to hide the green liquid death from view. She then placed Chloe's dish back where it belonged and even poured just a little of the green death into Chloe's water dish for good measure. They should be back soon, she thought. Then, to complete her plan, she slid back into the garage and placed the near-empty bottle of antifreeze onto the floor to make it appear as if it simply fell off the shelf and spilled. Now everything will fall in place. The bottle Joe placed in the garage fell off the shelf, and Chloe drank it. All Clara had to do was act grief-struck when the time was right. Later, Clara kept a close watch out the window for Joe and Chloe, and when they approached, she called out to Joe. "Got to keep 'em busy," she thought. Joe, I need your help putting up the new curtains in the living room." Joe turned to Chloe. "Looks like the boss has a job for me, old girl. You go get yourself a cool drink and rest a bit." Joe opened the door in the back spare room next to the kitchen and watched Chloe as she lapped up a drink of water from her water dish. That's not a bad idea, thought Joe as he entered the kitchen and poured himself a drink of water from the sink. Just as he was about to open the curtain to look outside, Clara pulled him toward the living room. "Come on," she said. "That darn Chloe has had more time with you today than I have." As Joe left the kitchen, he could hear Chloe crunching down on her favorite dog food. If there's one thing about a lab, he thought, they're always hungry. Clara showed him the new curtains, which seemed way too fancy for his taste, but Clara had always had a hankering for the finer things. Yes, they had the money because of the insurance policy on his previous wife, Judith, but Joe always felt bad spending it, especially when it was for Clara. Somehow it felt wrong to spend money he received for the death of his wife on another woman, even if she was his new wife. It was Joe who found Chloe laid out in the backyard near where Judith and Joe used to sit with her and stare out at the sunset at dusk. He just stared at Chloe, unsure of what he was looking at. Chloe's mouth was all contorted, as if she died in extreme pain. What had happened? Was it a heart attack? Joe headed toward the garage to get a shovel to lay the old girl to rest when he saw the bottle of spilled antifreeze on the floor. Joe ran and picked it up and turned it upside down. It was empty, all right. "Oh, no, I did this. I'm so sorry, Chloe. I'm so sorry." Joe slowly slid down the side of the garage and sat there and cried, savagely throwing the empty bottle toward the covered trash can. From inside the house, Clara studied her husband's face, now contorted with a combination of rage and sorrow. "He'll get over it," she thought. "Then it'll just be him and me, and I won't be sweeping up any more of that filthy dog hair." Joe spent the evening silent, not responding to a single word from Clara. "He'll get over it," she thought. "It'll just take a little time." Joe spent the rest of the night after dinner, a dinner he didn't eat, rocking back and forth in the rocker on the front porch. "Joe," yelled Clara. "Joe, it's time for bed." But Joe didn't acknowledge Clara. He simply continued rocking back and forth in the chair, creating a continuing squeaking back and forth throughout the night, forward and back, forward and back. Clara lay in bed listening to the weak creak of the rocker, its rhythm never changing, like a pendulum on a grandfather clock. "He'll get over it," she thought. "I'll make him get over it." The next morning, Joe got up early and headed out with his fishing pole to their pond about a half-acre away. No word to Clara, he just walked out the door and headed down the well-worn path. "Well, at least he's not rocking in that damn rocker anymore," thought Clara as she watched him fade into the woods. Meanwhile, Clara pulled out her broom and prepared to free the house of dog hair for the last time. As she swept, she couldn't help but think about the dog. Chloe's face was frozen in pain. Clara hadn't thought the poison would hurt her. She just figured it would go quietly to sleep like they do at the vet's. She looked down at the wad of hair she swept up and noticed that it seemed to separate each time she tried to sweep it together, like her broom was a magnet trying to connect with a magnet of an opposite charge. What the hell? She thought. After a moment, the hair seemed to collect itself into a corner of the room and form a ball about the size of a small poodle. Clara waved the broom forward at it, and it quickly blew away from it. But how it blew away from her, she couldn't understand. It was almost as if the hair deliberately crawled away from the broom. She decided to work on the smaller tufts of fur and would bring them together later. However, once she'd swept together enough hair to form a dog-sized ball, it too seemed to dodge the broom and quickly move into a corner and stay there. Clara laughed at herself for being so silly as to think Chloe's hair was alive. It was just a pile of hair, nothing more. Deciding she was tired of sweeping the hair, she walked into the kitchen to get herself a glass of water. Once in the kitchen, she pulled down a jelly glass and filled it with water from the tap and took a drink, but quickly spit out what was inside. Instead of a cool drink of water, she had tried to drink a mouthful of dog hair. Gagging and almost throwing up, Clara spit out the hair, which seemed to cling to her lips and the inside of her mouth. It took several minutes to clean all the hair from her face, mouth, and lips. Afterwards, she sat down in Joe's recliner to gather her thoughts and rest a bit. As she sat there, Chloe's contorted face once again surfaced in her mind. "Stop it," she thought. "Get that out of your head." It wasn't too noticeable at first, but after a moment or two she felt a crawling sensation on her legs. Thinking she had a spider on her leg, Clara quickly brushed her leg and found her hand tangled in strands of black and gray hair. "What the hell?" she screamed as she desperately pulled at the hair that had attached itself around her legs. Every time she pulled at the hair, it seemed to gather from the floor to attach itself even further onto her legs, almost as if it were trying to mummify her then and there. Clara screamed and tore at the hair that continued to multiply and replace any hair she'd just removed. With great effort, she tore away at it until it finally gave way and freed her legs. Once free, she made for the front door, but just before she reached it, a large ball of hair formed into the shape of a dog, and not just any dog. The fur had formed itself into the shape of Chloe, standing guard at the door and keeping Clara from going any further. "No, it can't be you. You're dead." The hair took a crouching attack position and slowly crept toward Clara. Clara quickly spun around and ran for the kitchen, but tripped over the recliner and fell hard to the floor. The hair clamped on her in an instant, filling her nose and mouth. Clara struggled, but the more she pulled at the hair, the more hair appeared to replace it. Soon her whole body was covered in gray and black hair. Clara's face contorted into one of sheer terror as she fought to catch her breath, tearing small pieces of the furry mesh away to create openings in which to breathe, only to have them immediately filled by more hair. Clara fought for air as if she were drowning in that farm pond behind the house. Finally, hair covered her body completely and squeezed around her like a boa constrictor finishing off its prey. After a moment or two, Clara's body grew still, and the hair around it relaxed from her body to regroup and form the shape of Chloe once more. As Joe climbed the hill back to his house, he spied an all too familiar form standing on the front lawn, waiting for him. "Chloe?" The rear of the form started shaking back and forth, wagging its tail as it were. "Chloe, is that you?" The form ran up to Chloe, who quickly petted it and hugged it. "Chloe, it is you. I thought you were dead. I'm sorry, old girl. How did you ever get out of your—" "Never mind, it doesn't matter. It's good to have you back." The form rubbed up against him. "Yeah, you're a good old girl. It's good to have you back home. Let's say we go back and fish some more. Fishing just wasn't the same without you." With that, Joe turned away from the house and away from Clara and headed back to his favorite fishing hole, with Chloe by his side. The end.